Hello, everybody. Welcome back. I am so happy to have my next guest on the show. She is doing so much for the first responder community. She is Paige Arnone. She is the founder of Firstgevity, and she's here on the show today. Paige, welcome.
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I had the pleasure of meeting you. We went for coffee. What was it? A couple of weeks, last week? And we actually met about a year ago at a first responder conference here in Arizona. You were doing some yoga work, which we're going to talk about. That's what you do for first responders. But it is so good to see you again. And thank you for being here. It's a beautiful day in Arizona again. How did you get into the work you do for first responders? Going in, teaching them yoga and all the different types. How did you get into that?
Yeah, so I always kind of say that it happened by chance or luck. I kind of fell into it in a way. I started teaching first responders a little over 5 years ago. And I was teaching a free yoga class for a city here in the Arizona area. So city of Gilbert, they were hosting a wellness event for their employees. And so they asked me to come and teach yoga. And there was another gentleman who was teaching a HIIT or training or a HIIT training, circuit training during the event, intensity. Yeah. So the idea was that he was going to do that. And then I was going to teach yoga after as a recovery session. And that gentleman was a sergeant at the police academy. So he asked me if I wanted to come and teach his recruit class. I said yes. And then the story kind of has a funny twist because when he brought me in, he was telling me that he was leaving soon. And so he was trying to get me introduced to the right people and, pass my business card around the academy so that I could continue to teach there. And he left to become a firefighter, which I guess is kind of a unique story. But he's actually really well known and really well respected in the area. I think he still is a firefighter for the city of Gilbert.
That's awesome.
So it was never really my intention. I didn't set out saying I'm going to teach first responder yoga and I'm going to find my niche. It really happened organically, and it was the best thing to happen to me. It ended up being so fulfilling and, my life purpose, and obviously kind of transitioned and evolved into what I'm doing now, but it was totally by chance.
Now, what's the difference between, is it different teaching yoga to first responders as opposed to, for lack of a better word, regular people or like the general population? What's different about first responders? Is it just all the same?
No, it's completely different. So one, as a teacher, you need to know who your audience is and how to teach to that audience. So teaching first responders is going to be different than teaching in a yoga studio, because typically first responders are either new or maybe a little weary about yoga. Let's be honest, it's not something that's fully received yet. And I think that there's still a stigma around it, that it's feminine or woo-woo. And so I'm not going to walk into a police department and start chanting or, saying really spiritual things.
Because that's the misconception, like you said.
Yeah. And it's just not the environment. Right. And so I think that would turn people away. Whereas at a yoga studio, I think you can get away with theming and, talking about spirituality a little bit more. But also in the same breath, I think that, first responders, you have to consider the nature of their job and trauma. And when you go in to teach a class, you need to be super mindful of those things too. And I think you do that in a studio space, but even more so when you're teaching first responders, that you have to understand the stressors, the trauma, PTSD, and you teach to that and you're sensitive to that. So the way you teach is going to be different. And then, obviously teaching in a really direct way is the way that I do it, at least. I'm not saying that that's how every yoga teacher does for first responders, but I think that you need to know your audience and you need to teach to that. So it is very, very different.
So when you go into an agency, because you're going into agencies, right? You just don't have them come to you. You go into an agency and you teach them some basics, right? Foundational stuff, is it well received after you break past that, like you said, that misconception, flowing robes and chanting and stuff like that? I mean, how is it received? I imagine pretty well, or because you're doing quite well with the first responder community. I mean, it's being received pretty well.
I think that you nailed it with, it's that initial start that is the hardest thing, just getting someone in the door, you're like pulling them, saying like, let's go, just try it. And yes, I do find that it's very well received if you teach in the right way. Like I said, if you're teaching to your audience and you're making it accessible and approachable and modern, and you're speaking to them in a way that they understand, and relating what they do to what we're doing in the yoga class, then yes, 100%, I think it's really well received. And typically, especially in the beginning, the most common thing that everyone's going to talk about is their body feeling better.
Mm-hmm.
Usually the mental and the emotional part of it kind of comes later. So usually when I first walk in, everyone's like, I will hear relaxed, which is great, right? You want to make sure that you're reducing stress and that everyone feels relaxed. But it's like, my body feels better. My low back feels better. My shoulder feels better. So yeah, I do find that it's really well received, but it's challenging to get that initial first step and get them to like do it.
So even if you're out of shape, I mean, it can still, yoga still benefits that because, right? I mean, you can start to become, like you said, feel better about your body, stretch those areas of the body, breathe correctly. So even if you don't have to be some, super in shape person to do yoga, I mean, I think it helps, but it's really for everybody, right?
Yeah. And I think it's so funny because yoga is the only thing that I've ever heard someone say, I'm not flexible, so I can't do it.
Yeah.
Or
Like I
I'm
did
not
the
in shape,
first
so I
time.
can't do it, and you never hear someone say, I'm not strong, so I'm not going to go to the gym. I'm out
I
of
like
shape, so I'm
that.
not going to go to the gym. You go to the gym to get stronger, to get more fit. You go to yoga for the same reasons, to get more flexible, to get more fit. So yeah, I think that there's a difference between ability and what word am I thinking of? You got me up so early. It is 7 a.m. everyone. It is 7 a.m. in Arizona. Ability and willingness.
Yeah.
Those are two separate things. And I think that, sometimes, and I'm not only talking about first responders, I'm talking about everyone. Sometimes the excuse is I'm not flexible and
Yeah.
therefore I won't do it. When really it's something that maybe they're not receptive to. And so they're two different things, but yeah. I mean, come to yoga to
Yeah.
get flexible, come to yoga to get more fit.
Yeah. And yoga is, I mean, I've tried yoga before. I think I told you when we met, I mean, I've done hot yoga a lot
Right.
in the past, and that kicked my ass in the hot yoga, but that's a different type. You don't do hot yoga going into the first responder agencies, but hot yoga just, I was drained. But to your point, I felt really good afterwards,
Mm-hmm.
because you're stretching, obviously the temperature's up to, 1,000,000 degrees, but I felt really good. Like you said, I mean, it is good for your, not only your body, but your mind.
Yeah. And I think that most people, their first introduction to yoga is hot yoga. I mean, it was for me. My very first class I ever took was a hot yoga class as
I wouldn't
well.
do hot yoga at the first time, right?
Oh, well, I mean, you
It depends
can.
on the
I
person, I
think,
guess.
yeah, I mean, I never like to speak in like no's, like I would honestly rather someone do hot yoga for the first time rather than not do yoga at all, at least it's something. Um, I definitely don't teach hot yoga. I mean, I have in the past, not a set sequence, but I've definitely taught in hot rooms before. Um, I think that I think it's two things. I think that hot yoga can be a good introduction for individuals who are like type A
Mm-hmm.
and like I want to sweat. I want to yeah, same. I want to sweat. I want to work really hard. And so it's the opposite of feminine or woo woo, right? Like you're just trying to survive. Like you're trying not to die in these rooms. And so um and also, I've talked to a lot of different firefighters and they like hot yoga because it simulates the elements that that they
That's
go
a good
through.
point. Yeah, that's a good
Right. And
point.
so they're like, okay, we're learning to breathe and to like, find mental clarity through through these really extreme elements. So I get that part of it too. However, I think that one, I do think it's really, really challenging. And so a lot of the poses are not accessible. And I think that that can be a deterrent, or it can turn people away. No one likes to walk into an environment and feel embarrassed or feel like they suck. It's already new, and like you feel like you're tight and all these things. And you walk into like a really hard yoga class and you're like, wow, I can't do any of these things. And so I think that it could go both ways. It could either be something that's really positive and people are like, I love this, and I'm going to keep going because it's so hard, or it could turn people away because it's too hard.
Yeah.
My approach is all levels. Obviously, when I go into the agencies, we're not pumping heat and humidity in there. Most of what I do is virtual yoga. And so, you can kind of choose where you do that class. If you want to do it outside in the heat, that's fine. But I'm not specifically going to be teaching a hot yoga class because I want this to be accessible and approachable and something that you can incorporate into your day-to-day life, and in a realistic way.
Yeah.
And in a way that you can do it long term too. So I'm not teaching hot yoga. But I have taught hot yoga in the past, and I have done hot yoga in the past, so I get it.
Yeah. And for the listeners out there, Paige is an AZ post-certified instructor. So that is huge for the listener. Listeners know this. Maybe some of them don't, but to get that post-certification in curriculums, in this case, yoga, is big because that brings credibility, obviously, to your program. And to have that adopted by Arizona Post is huge, Paige.
Yeah, I think I had a sergeant at the police academy who really championed me, and he had told me, and this was several years ago, but he was like, let's get you started on the process of AZ post certification. He's like, it'll be a feather in your hat. It'll be something really good for you to have. And I don't think that I knew at the time the weight that held, and
huge.
What a big deal that was. I really didn't know. And then when I started working with the different agencies in the Phoenix area, that was the one thing that they said. And I actually had a chief of police. He said, we wouldn't, and we were meeting in person, and he's like, this wouldn't be a conversation if you didn't have your AZ post certification. And so I think that has helped, build that credibility a lot for me. But I didn't even know at the time, and so thankful for the sergeant who, championed me. Shout out to Sergeant Jason Christie. He really helped me a lot with that. And so really grateful for that.
Yeah. And like we were talking about, before when we met, is this, and this, Paige, the first responder community is a pretty isolated, community. But once you're in that community, once you got your foot in the door, and once you start working with the first responders, it's a small community. I'm not just talking about Arizona, everywhere. And so once the word gets around, you gotta check out Paige Arnone and what she's doing. Then it just, and you probably this because you're living it. It just kind of multiplies, and people are like, oh yeah, let's get Paige. She's AZ post certified, and so and that's every state when you're post certified. With a curriculum or as an officer, that's huge. So good job with that. And the thing that I was looking over your bio, I like retired skydiver. Retired skydiver, Paige.
Yes, I've lived a lot of different lives. I've had a lot of different chapters. So yes, that is one of them.
I love skydiving. I haven't done it in a while, and I was in the Army. I think I told you I was jumping out of airplanes. A little different. It was a static line kind of thing. But I've done a couple tandem jumps back in the day, and I would love to get into skydiving again.
I think I've hung up my hat for that. I think I'm done. I'm retired from skydiving.
Retired.
I am retired. It was such an interesting and fun and unique part of my life. And, I look back with such great memories. but I think I'm done.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was great. I was really young. I was, fresh. I dropped out of college to become a skydiver, basically, is kind of my trajectory. I was like, I'm done with college. I'm going to go move, in the middle of nowhere and just skydive for a living. It was kind of my like eat, pray, love moment where I was like, I'm just going to go and, live this really interesting lifestyle. And so I did. And, I was teaching other people how to skydive, and I was competing in skydiving competitions. And I actually, in 2013, I held a Guinness World Record for the largest formation. It was all female formation flying upside down. So
here in Arizona, you did that in
Arizona.
Arizona?
Yep, in 2013. It's since been broken. So
Wow.
I'm kind of washed up in that way. But in
Washed up, yeah.
2013, Guinness World Record, largest all female formation flying upside down.
Yeah.
So, I accomplished a lot, and it was really fun. And then it was just kind of time for me to move on. I had a really bad season that I was working where there were a lot of injuries, a lot of fatalities, and the job became really stressful where, it was a constant feeling of like, this is it.
And that's the place because I know, because I've jumped out of planes, and once you get that mindset, it's almost like you got to hang it up, man.
Yeah.
I mean, because you got to trust your equipment, like you said. But if you get into that mindset of, oh shit, that's just not, especially when you're jumping to, thousands of feet up in the air.
You can't be timid. You have to like charge it. And so after that, I did indoor skydiving for a little bit safer. And then eventually I kind of,
you know what you ought to do, Paige? You ought to just go on a few more jumps and do skydiving yoga.
Say wingsuit? Oh,
skydiving yoga.
I kind of did.
Be up there.
I kind of did. Those were the things that I did. So there are different styles, just like, in yoga, there's different styles. But the thing that I did freestyle and free flying. And so it was kind of like that. It was tricks and different orientations in the air. And so I kind of did, in a sense.
What's the highest you've jumped for?
18,000 feet.
Mine was about 15.
Yep. So we had 18,000 with oxygen. When you do large formation type stuff, you have multiple planes. I think we had 5 planes. They all fly in formation, and then everyone jumps out at the same time. But it's obviously going to be staggered because you're jumping at it at the same time, but different times, right? And so, you have to have more time in the air to be able to link up and hold hands.
Do you think that experience, maybe this is a stupid question, do you think that experience when you were in your skydiving career, do you think that kind of aided you to where you're at today as far as like teaching yoga and going into, doing what you're doing? Do you think that aided you? Because you have to have obviously a lot of concentration. You have to believe in yourself when you're jumping out of a plane. Do you think that aided to where you're at today? Or was it just like a phase where, okay, yeah, I was jumping out of planes?
I think that everything has aided. Like, I believe that everything is a next step to where you're going.
Building, yeah.
And yes, 100%. I mean, when you're doing something like that, you have to focus on your breath. You have to have that mental resilience, and you have to find that concentration and that clarity. If you're panicking and you're, hyperventilating and you're freaking out, there's no way you're going to be able to do those things. So I think I was already practicing yoga during that time. I definitely do think that I gained tools that I later, was able to expand on as my career in yoga expanded. Mm-hmm.
Now, the one thing I wanted to kind of shift a little bit is, we all deal with trauma. We all have baggage, I learned as the older I get, that you just never know what people are dealing with. And so when you go into an organization and you're trying to teach them yoga, which is stress reduction, more, flexibility, all that stuff. First responders, as you know, Paige, they're just subjected to trauma daily. But you didn't have the best childhood, and you've gone through difficult times. Can you talk to that a little bit?
Yeah. So, my background or my childhood, both my parents are drug addicts,
Mhm.
um, drug of choice, methamphetamines. My dad was in prison from the age of 5 until I was 11. So he served a 6-year sentence for the sale of narcotics. Um, when he got out, he immediately went back to using. So he was also extremely abusive verbally and physically. So, um, my childhood experiences were really challenging. My mom left when I was about 8 years old, and she left me in the care of my stepdad and didn't come back for a while. She was also, heavy in her addiction, and she wasn't physically abusive, but she was really mentally and emotionally abusive. And she would just kind of come in and out of my life when she needed something.
Yeah.
And usually it was that, she needed money to feed her addiction. And so she would try to leverage me against my stepdad to get what she needed. Or she would have a new boyfriend. And so she would pull me out of my stable home into, an unstable environment with her new boyfriend. And then when they would inevitably break up, then I would go back. So I was kind of like back and forth
Back and forth.
between,
Yeah.
and then also having the experience of my dad, who he lived in California after he got out of prison. He served his parole in California. So, and seeing him, physically abuse his partners. And yeah, I mean, it was really challenging. I grew up, you know, just really feeling like I wasn't enough. And, um, you know, neither of my parents wanted me. And so in my head as a kid, something was wrong with me. And so my confidence was really low. My self esteem was really low. And I was constantly trying to change myself to be a version that I thought they would love. And
Mhm.
so I didn't really have a good sense of who I was. I think I lost who I was along the way because I was like, well, maybe if I was prettier or funnier or smarter, then they would stop doing what they were doing and they would, come back and they would be my parents and they would love me. And then that didn't happen. And so then I turned to resentment and anger and, started choosing the wrong paths and the wrong friends. Um, and that's when I, started having really bad anxiety and panic attacks. And I was really nasty and reactive because of that. And so,
What was the catalyst that the point where you said, okay, I have to choose a different path. I mean, this is not the path. I don't want to follow in their footsteps. You know what I mean? What was the aha moment where, okay, I got to fucking do this. I got to get away from this. I got to change my life.
yeah, I think it's so funny because growing up, that was always what I said. Like, I never want to be like my parents. I always, had that in me. But because I was hurting so much, like I feel like I
Sure.
fell into this like really like negative and, bad path for a little while. And I think I really just, I don't know if there was one moment, it wasn't like I woke up one day and was like, oh my God,
Just
I'm
kind of a
really,
building
I'm fucking up
momentum.
here.
Yeah.
But it was, in college, I was like, I just want to be healthier. And I just want, I think I knew that I needed something to be able to like process because I had just shoved everything down for so long. I think on the surface, to everyone else, I was fine. I was happy and, I had friends and I was, a cheerleader and all of these things that I think, from an outside perspective, everyone would assume that I had a great upbringing because I didn't share those things
Sure.
with people. Like that wasn't something I wanted anyone to know. I wanted everyone to think that I was, great. And I started practicing yoga in college because I did want to become more physically fit. But I think deep down I knew that like I needed something to help with my panic attacks and my anxiety. And I found that in yoga.
Yeah.
So, in a lot of ways, and I say this a lot, and I think it's so maybe so cheesy, but it's so true that yoga really saved my life
Oh, there's nothing
in many
cheesy
ways.
about it. I mean, I don't think it's cheesy at all. Anything that is going to, I mean, treatment saved my life.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's different things that can save your life or get you on the right trajectory. And yoga is one of those, those modalities that it's so good for you, not just for your body, but for your mind, because that's the big thing, right? I mean, when you can get your mind more centered and start thinking clearly, and you're doing yoga and you're eating better and you're getting away from all that stuff. That's huge, Paige. I mean, that. And you're certified in, don't laugh at me if I butcher vinyasa.
Yes.
And then Ashtanga and Yin yoga.
Yeah,
I don't know what those mean, but they sound pretty cool.
Yeah, and I'm sure no one listening to this knows what those are either, so that's okay. The training that I had was a really well-rounded training. It had a heavy focus on what's called Ashtanga Vinyasa. So basically what that is, it's a very traditional practice based on moving meditation. So you're linking your breath with your movement.
Yeah.
And it's a strong practice. But I also had training in other styles. So, yin yoga, which is deep stretching, meditation, breathing exercises, like really heavy alignment was my training. So, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, no one really needs to know what Ashtanga Vinyasa means, but that's the style. And so my training was very heavily influenced by that because my teacher, that's his background. So,
yeah. And you mentioned meditation or mindfulness. I mean, I am a huge believer in practicing. I meditate, practice mindfulness. And for those listeners out there, when I talk about meditate, it goes back to what we said at the beginning. It's meditation does not have to be sitting there with your legs crossed, in a robe, chanting with incense in the background. You can meditate. I meditate when I'm at the gym, when I'm on the treadmill or doing whatever. I mean, it can be anywhere. It's just living in the moment. It's okay being in the moment, right?
Yeah. So meditation is the cessation of thoughts.
Yeah.
Right. So you're trying to clear the mind as much as you can.
Yeah.
So
it takes practice.
A lot of practice.
Because I remember when I first started I'm like, oh shit, thoughts are coming at me, but it's just breath. And like you said, trying to clear your mind.
Mm-hmm. And like you said, being super connected to the present moment, to your body, to what's happening in that specific moment. My first introduction to meditation was not good. And I think that experience has helped me a lot in what I do now because, and some of my friends, this is the first time I'm going to say this on like a podcast, but if you're my friend or my family, you know that I take like 3 baths a day. And this is because previously, when I was going through everything, I couldn't sit with myself at all for any amount of time without having like flashbacks and going into complete hysteria. And so I feel like I've earned that, now I can like sit in stillness. Relax. And so like, it's almost like an accomplishment that I'm able to do that. And so, people make fun of me about that, but I'm like, no, like I've earned that because I've worked hard.
When would they make fun of you?
No, just like in a like teasing way. They're like, okay. Are you in the bath again? 3 baths a day. Like, do you really need that? I'm like, I've earned these 3 baths a day,
and it sounds like that's your place. That's one of your places
where just you can
go and just be you and clear your mind.
Yeah. But my introduction to meditation was really kind of traumatic for me. And, I was in a group setting and I say forced, but they're like, sit down and meditate was kind of the idea. And it was a circle with other people who I didn't really know very well. It was not a trauma like informed environment at all. It was just like, okay, everyone sit down, close your eyes, cross-legged and meditate. And I think it was like a 20 or 30 minute silent meditation. And I was inside just feeling like I was going to explode. I was so uncomfortable. There were so many things coming up. I did not want to be there at all. And I ended up having to run out of the room, and I was hysterically crying because I was like, I wasn't prepared for that. And I think that that's something that is not talked about in the industry a lot, is that you have to be prepared for meditation. And you have to be physically prepared. Sitting in a cross-legged position for 30 minutes for a lot of
Yeah.
people is not
Yeah.
accessible.
Yeah.
Like I go to the agencies or to, the academies, and some cannot sit in a cross-legged position because they're
Yeah.
so tight. It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
uncomfortable. So physically you have to be prepared, but then also like mentally and emotionally you have to be prepared for these things. And so I think as a teacher, you have to be really mindful of that, that someone who has PTSD or trauma, sitting them down and saying, meditate, might be a really traumatic and really challenging experience
That's a
for
good
them.
point. Yeah.
And so that was my introduction, and it turned me away from meditation for a long time. And I went to my teacher and I was like, hey, like I don't want to sit with myself. I don't want to know what's down there. Like I'm afraid of what's inside.
Yeah.
And my teacher was like, Paige, like you have to be able to sit with yourself.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you don't want to sit with yourself, who else is going to want to sit with you?
Yeah.
And
I
it
was
was
gonna
like
just
this
about to say
moment.
that. Yeah.
It was this moment where I was like, oh my gosh, you're so right. Like if I don't like me, who else is going to like me?
Yeah.
And so I knew that that was the work. And so, I gradually started working on these things, and it's been years and years and years and years of this, and it didn't happen right away. And I think that a lot of people should understand that it is a practice, and it's okay if it's uncomfortable. And just like you said before, there are different ways to meditate, and not everyone is going to gravitate towards the same thing. Maybe doing that moving meditation, at least in the beginning, is the way that we need to approach it. I typically, for first responders, really try to stick to yoga nidra meditation, which is a specific style that is typically used for veterans or anyone with PTSD, because it's super neutral. It's not meant to be triggering at all. It's very relaxing, very much like a body scan or mindfulness, safe space where, you can feel and you can, reap the benefits of the meditation without, any sort of like triggering or trauma response to it. So, yeah.
No,
I know I talk a lot. So
no.
You're like, this
I
is
think at some point you're going to have to, like you said, Paige, I mean, you're going to have to sit and dig deep within yourself, and be comfortable. Like you said, I love what you said. I mean, it's all amazing, but I love what you said about, look, if you can't sit with yourself, if you can't be content, and it does take practice, it's constant practice. If you can't sit with yourself, if you're not comfortable with yourself, how is somebody else going to be comfortable with you?
Yeah.
Because people are going to pick up on that, and yes, we all go through challenges. We are all carrying a bunch of shit, but that's what modalities like yoga and being, having, somebody like you come in and teach yoga. You have to start somewhere,
Yeah.
and we need something in our life to keep us going, to help alleviate stress and trauma and stuff like that.
And there's two things that come to mind. The first thing with, having to be able to sit with yourself and dig deep. And this might be something that's controversial when I say this, but for the longest time, I thought that by shoving that shit down and not dealing with it and putting on a strong face and like posting up, that was the strength. I thought that that was me being strong and being like, I'm good. I'm not affected by it. Everything's good. And through my years of, of practice and, trying to understand everything and process everything, I've realized that the true strength is in dealing with it.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
It's easy to escape and shove it down or numb. Like that's, because that feels good, right? It's easier to like not want to deal with it and to run away from it. The hard part is like sitting with it and being like, I got to actually deal with it and process it like that. And it's so hard. It's
Oh, absolutely.
so hard. But that's where the strength is.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so, that's my first thought of, is like, yeah, it's hard. It's not easy. But vulnerability is strength, and
Oh,
dealing with it is
absolutely.
strength. And I think that we have to flip that concept on its head, because I think a lot of people, just in the world, but I think a lot of people view vulnerability as weakness, and it's really the true strength.
Especially in the first responder field. You know this now.
You said it, not me.
That's true. That's
Yeah.
true. I mean, because, and I was like that too. I mean, you can't show weakness. You gotta bury shit. You gotta, and sometimes that's good because it keeps you alive or keeps you focused on the next call. But at some point, there's only so much you can take. I mean, it's like filling a glass with water. I mean, there's only so much that's going to go in that glass before it starts spilling over. And in the case of trauma and PTSD and stress, it's going to manifest into other things: drinking, drugs, anger, bitterness. It's going to manifest at some point. So what a great thing to do, such as yoga and meditation, to kind of counteract that. Okay, I can deal with this. I'm resilient. I can deal with anything that life throws at me, but you have to believe in yourself, and you have to do things such as yoga and bringing people like you in to kind of help counteract that. That's how we become better. That's how we become more resilient.
Yep. 100%.
Paige Arnone, you are amazing. You're awesome.
Thank you.
I love talking to you. You're so wise, and you're doing great things for the first responder community. I love the yoga. If people want to get in touch with you, what's the best way? I mean, you got your website, Firstgevity.
Yeah.
Correct?
So firstgevity.com. And, right now, like I said, most of what I'm doing is virtual. So locally in the Arizona area, I do work with agencies and I do in-person classes, but mostly what I'm doing is virtual. So, I work with departments and agencies directly. So always can reach out to me at Paige@firstgevity.com, just in general. If anyone wants to say hi or ask me questions, can always reach out to me that way. LinkedIn's a really good place to reach out to me too. But, working exclusively with agencies who are prioritizing the health and wellness of their employees. So that's kind of, the direction that I've gone. And it's been really amazing to see how many first responder agencies are doing that. They're building these
more and more
robust wellness programs that include a lot of different things. It's not just yoga. There's, peer support and, traditional therapy and physical therapy and all these things that are being added to these wellness programs. And so, I am so fortunate and grateful to be a small piece of that puzzle. So, really just trying to get in touch with anyone who is wanting to add yoga to their health and wellness programs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Paige, you're amazing. Like I said, everything we talked about will be in the show notes for the listener. You can also check out the YouTube that's going to be pushed out when I push this out. YouTube channel, CJEvolution Podcast. Paige Arnone, it's been a pleasure. I hope to see you again for some coffee.
Yeah. Thank you so much.